The Harrison House is at 124 Main Street in Branford. It is the home and museum of the Branford Historical Society since 1974. My name is Jane Bouley, and I'd like to tell you about the Harrison House, the people who lived in it, and how it relates to the town of Branford. The first settlers of Branford lived on today's Main Street and Montowi Street. This map is a depiction from 1710 of the various areas of Branford, and including the center of Branford. Eventually, the sons and grandsons of the first settlers moved east, west, and north to North Branford. The section highlighted in red is called the Canoebrook District, and you can see on the lower right what was originally Montowi Street was called Town Street, and Pig Lane is a street that no longer exists. And the King's Highway ran from New York to Boston, roughly along what is today Branford's Main Street. The brooks that you see within the red rectangle was the Canoe Brook, and that has been largely covered over by development and North Main Street, which was built in the 1930s. The late John Sliney, our long-term first selectman, remembered as a child playing in the Canoe Brook. There was a house at the corner of today's Cherry Hill Road and West Main Street, or Main Street. The first Nathaniel Harrison, grandson of Richard, the first settler, lived at the corner of Main Street and Cherry Hill Road. Cherry Hill Road was then called Blatchley's Cartway. The house was built in 1660 on 4 acres by Daniel Swain. The house eventually became known as the Old Baldwin House, and by the time this picture was taken, it had been allowed to go to ruin. A 1901 newspaper stated, "The Old Baldwin House is no more. A gang of men and boys with ropes pulled it down." You can see on the right where the fence is Blatchley's Cartway or Cherry Hill Road, and behind the Swain House is Canoebrook School. At that time, it still had a second floor, which eventually burned. Nathaniel Harrison subdivided this property, and his eldest son, Nathaniel Jr., built the Harrison House in 1724. We, of course, do not know what Nathaniel looked like, but he was a farmer and held several positions of esteem in town. He was called Nathaniel Harrison Esquire, a title that was not placed lightly. He was a deputy to the General Assembly for 8 years, justice of the peace for 40 years, and captain of the local train band or militia. The Harrison House is a second-period Connecticut colonial called a 2-over-2. That is 2 rooms downstairs and 2 identical rooms upstairs. The date of 1724 is confirmed by research done by the late John Kirby, by extensive study of the architectural style of the house, and by its construction methods. These construction methods were studied by Arnold Peterson, a retired contractor, and he built a model in 1984 using all the same tools, making miniature copies of those, and the same construction methods that they would have used in 1724. The model took 300 hours to build, and the house has 240 studs. This is how the house would have originally looked with smaller windows than are there today. Glass was very expensive and had to be imported from England. Some of the original exterior of the house can still be seen in the attic and was discovered about 25 years ago behind another wall in the kitchen, and we leave it exposed today so people can come and see the original exterior from 1724. These are cedar clapboards. Only an expert craftsman would have been able to be in charge of building this house. The wood frame is mostly white oak and was probably cut on the property, all hand-hewn and marked with Roman numerals to keep track of their place within the frame. This was all done by manpower, some basic tools such as axes and adzes and saws, pulleys and oxen. This would not have been a barn raising. An entire side would have been much too heavy to pull into place at one time. The frame was built floor by floor, and the entire house is built around, tied into, and supported by the massive center chimney. Just think about the task to build the house, let alone the chimney, which when you come to the Harrison house, it is really huge and a sight to behold. As you enter the Harrison house, the entryway, properly called the porch, leads directly to the stairway and faces the bottom of the center chimney. The stair balusters are original, as is most of the wood throughout the house. The balusters and finials on the stairs are oak, and the stairway is much like that of the Highland House in Guilford. As you turn right from the porch, on the first floor is the hall. This is probably the most important room of the house. It would be today's living room, dining room, kitchen, and family room. The paneled walls in this room and throughout the house are made of tulip, a cousin of the magnolia tree. The most important feature of the hall was the large stone fireplace, which is 8 feet in width. Atop the fireplace is a beautiful lintel made of oak. It is at this fireplace that all the cooking, the heating of the house, candle and soap making was done, in addition to watching the children as these tasks were undertaken. In the hall, you can see the beautiful hand-hewn marks on the summer beam, and that it is notched into the other beams and the cross beams notched into it. The summer beam weighs several tons. All the framing, as is the summer beam, is white oak. There are corner posts and chimney posts, and each of these posts are carved and notched, and the girt, which is that side piece, notches into it, and it's held with wooden pegs. Each corner post weighs about 800 pounds. There were almost no nails used in the construction of the house, except in the exterior clapboards and in the flooring, because nails were imported from England and were very expensive. These corner posts and also the chimney posts carry the whole weight of the house. I think it is quite amazing how it has stayed standing for nearly 300 years. The craftsmen definitely knew what they were doing. The house is a testament to their knowledge. The room to the left on the first floor is called the parlor, a term that was still used during my grandmother's time. When we have school children tour the house, they have never heard of a parlor. This room was the fancy room. It was used for business, for having the minister over, or for Sunday dinners. The children were probably seldom allowed to be in the parlor. You'll note in the parlor there is also a summer beam, and much of the original wood is still in this room. A few of the rooms, such as the parlor, do have plaster, and this plaster is quite old. It is made of oyster shells and marsh hay. The main feature in the parlor is the corner cupboard. It is a particularly fine example of a Connecticut design with its fluted pilasters and carved rosettes. Our cupboard was copied for the one at the Chicago Art Museum. Inside the cupboard are examples of pink lusterware, fine china from the 1700s. Upstairs above the parlor is the parlor chamber, today called a bedroom. The entire family would sleep in one room, especially in the winter. Cozy indeed. Note again the summer beam and the wood surrounding it. The floorboards are original to the house, and the bottom of the floorboards would be the ceiling of the parlor below. The other bedroom upstairs is called the hall chamber, and today is our display room and museum. Nathaniel Harrison I died in 1760. Colonial Connecticut inheritance law was patterned after the English. That is, the eldest son received a double portion and almost always the father's house. So Nathaniel III inherited the house from his father in 1760, but he lived only 10 more years, dying at the age of 35. The Harrison family lived in the house for 76 years. Nathaniel III had only one child, a daughter, Martha, who inherited the house at the age of 10 and would have had guardians until she reached the age of 18. At the age of 18, she married Nicodemus Baldwin and moved down the street to the Swain House at the corner of Main Street and Cherry Hill Road, and that is why that house became known as the Baldwin House. Martha sold the Harrison house in 1800 to Joseph and Lorraine Bradley Lindsley. Lorraine Bradley was born and grew up down the street at 12 Bradley Street, a house which still stands. By 1822, they had 9 children, 8 of whom lived to adulthood, and think about all of them sleeping in the winter in the parlor chamber. Architectural historians believe that the lean-to, or L, on the back of the house was probably added about 1800 when the Lindsley family acquired the house. Now you might remember that Martha Harrison Baldwin sold the house in 1800 to the Lindsley family, but her mother, Mary Tyler Harrison, the widow of Nathaniel III, was still alive. And by law, the widow of Nathaniel Harrison had the right to live in 1/3 of the house during her natural life, and if she did not remarry. The documents spell out very clearly where she could live in the house. She could live in the parlor, use the back door, have a small garden, and use part of the cellar. This is the fireplace in the parlor, and we discovered about 25 years ago that it was originally identical to the large 8-foot stone fireplace that was in the hall, and we believe that this change was made to a smaller fireplace to accommodate the widow Mary Harrison, this would be more manageable for her to tend to this fire. Also at this time, a bake oven was added, similar to a pizza oven today. Mary Tyler Harrison lived in the parlor for 22 more years with the Lindsley family and their 9 children, to whom she was not related. She died at the age of 87, and after her death, the Lindsley family was allowed to take over the parlor. Members of the Lindsley family lived in the Harrison house for 137 years. One of the Lindsley's 9 children was a daughter named Lorraine Lindsley, named for her mother. Lorraine married Thomas Smith. Lorraine was born in the Harrison house in 1815 and died here in 1915 at the age of 100. She was well known in town due to her advanced age. This photograph shows Lorraine and her son, Willard Smith. During the Smiths' care of the house was updated slightly and Victorianized. You'll notice the Victorian wallpaper and furnishings, but if you look closely around, the corner cupboard was left, as were the beams and the floor. Because there were really only 2 families that ever lived in this house, it was kept in remarkably original condition and did not even have indoor plumbing till 1930. After Lorraine's death in 1915, her son Willard and his wife Helen Sherry continued living in the house. He raised chickens in the backyard and sold eggs in a little wagon that he carted around town. People remembered them kindly. His wife Helen was very friendly and good to the neighborhood children, since Willard and she had none of their own. Helen Smith was the last of the family to live in the Harrison house and died in 1937. The Harrison house was purchased by J. Frederick Kelly, a nationally known architect and architectural historian with a practice in New Haven. He designed the New Haven Historical Society Museum, the Yale Medical School, and was the consulting architect for the restoration of the Whitfield House in Guilford. The Harrison house is included in his book, Early Domestic Architecture in Connecticut, an important book in the field. He restored the Harrison House to his interpretation of what the house originally looked like, and it is to this condition that the Branford Historical Society maintains the house. The Harrison House was left by Kelly when he died in 1950 to the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, now called Historic New England. The Branford Historical Society has leased the house from them for 40 years. The house is many things. It is a museum and our meeting place. We keep this house as a house museum showing people what life was like in the early 1800s. It is filled with artifacts, many of which have Branford origins. An example is this great chair that belonged to George Baldwin, who was one of my ancestors and came to Branford in the 1660s from Milford. A colonial house museum needs the support of many volunteers. The Garden Club has maintained the gardens for most of the last 40 years. The house is of course important for its architecture and being able to show the public the craftsmanship of the 1700s. There simply are not many of these houses left. The house is an important building in the Branford Colonial Thematic House District and in the Canoebrick Historic District, which are both federally recognized historic districts. The house just doesn't stand alone. It is a part of the neighborhood of Canoebrick and its history, and it's an integral part of the streetscape when you drive down Main Street. So besides the importance of the Harrison House for its architecture, for me, the most important thing are the families who lived here, the Harrison, Lindsley, and Smiths, and it is their story that the Branford Historical Society would like to continue telling.